Looks like it's working. All right, we're just waiting for some folks to log in here. 1 minute to broadcast from the greenhouse in the sky. And can you send a chat message to see if it's working? Let's just say hi. 1 minute to broadcast. Excellent. From the greenhouse in the sky. Oh, it worked. I'm so excited. All right. Hi, Jan. Good to see you here. I really appreciate you tuning in. I know I shouldn't be so excited about this, but Angus isn't here, and we managed to get this set up without the assistance of a 16-year-old who understands technology, so I might actually be able to join this century. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Greenhouse in the Sky. I'm not normally a huge fan of daylight saving time, but today I am because we can show off the greenhouse this time. The previous lives that were run at 7 p.m. were dark, and so we had to have all this artificial lighting. But now we can suddenly see, hey Jen, good to see you. We can show off our greenhouse. I'm so excited. I like, honestly, when I thought about daylight saving times, normally I just get like really sad, but I was like, wait a minute, we can actually show people the greenhouse now that we've had it. So that's the good thing about it. So welcome to the greenhouse in the sky. Let me try that again. Welcome to the greenhouse in the sky. This is I like to call it my productive playground, where I get to play with all sorts of planting ideas and get to grow year round. And those of you who, whoa, somebody's playing. Somebody was playing with my mount there. Those of you who know me know how much I love getting my hands dirty, and now I can do it year round. It's very exciting. I am all about the soil and all about biodiversity, and I know a little bit about design, but fortunately I have a brilliant partner who refuses to be on camera, who designed and built this space. And I was fortunate enough to meet him just as he was building it. So isn't that wonderful? And I'm going to talk about today some of the things that have been done here, some of the things that we've implemented so that we can grow food year-round in the middle of the Rocky Mountains with very little external stuff coming in. So there's two main concepts that we've applied to this growing space, and that is passive solar design to capture the sun's rays, retain it, hold on to it, and then you release it when you grow colder. And then the other design concept is geothermal energy transfer design. So this unit here, which is fantastic and it's amazing, and I'm so excited and pleased that I get to play in here, implements these two things together. And it actually, in some ways, it actually fuses it so much that I think we almost need to come up with a new moniker for it, because, oh, hey, I'm so glad you've joined us. I know that you follow a lot. I hope I'm saying your name, Sajal, properly. I see you a lot on my videos, so I'm really glad that you're joining in today. So what we do here is not only do we capture the passive solar energy, and I'm going to talk about how we do that here, but we then drive it into the ground so that we're implementing that solar energy within the geothermal energy that's already existing underground. So for those folks who are new to the whole idea of four-season growing and passive solar or geothermal greenhouses, I'm going to explain a few key concepts here. I think that the number one thing to talk about first would be thermal mass, because honestly, you can, this is something that and another thing I want to say is, yes, we've implemented this into greenhouse design, but a lot of the things I'm talking about today should honestly be incorporated into housing design, because we can't keep using so much external energy when there's a few design tweaks you can make to make your home's more efficient as well. So yes, we're talking today about how we're implementing that into a greenhouse. But I think it would be smart if we start thinking about how we can implement this into housing, in particular in the northern region of the world where we live. We're in zone 3 here. We get long winters, but we get a lot of sunlight. So maybe passive solar design isn't a bad idea. So what we're doing here is we are trying to build up the thermal mass that can capture the sun's heat throughout the day as much as possible. The number one thing for that, honestly, is positioning. I get asked so often, people see pictures of this beautiful space, they're like, well, why did you build a whole separate unit? Why didn't you just build it on the side of the house that existed already? So there's lots of reasons for that, because positioning is one of the most important things to consider when you're considering building a passive solar greenhouse, because you need to be oriented in such a way that you're going to capture the sun as much as you can. So I love the house here on the homestead, but it's nestled in the middle of, basically it's like trees completely surrounding it, and it's perched on a ravine. So that's not going to work in terms of, that's not going to work in terms of capturing the sun's rays, because we're in the middle of a forest, literally, at the house. So this is built probably, let's say, about 150 meters from the house on the homestead, where we're in a much more open space. So we could orient the building exactly so it's going to be able to capture the most sun during the day. So over here, this is south facing. Just as you would want to build a garden, so especially if you're growing heat-loving plants, you want to build a garden so that on the most south-facing that you can with heat-loving plants, that wall there is the north wall. That's important. So we are trying to capture through this huge open roof here as much of the sun as we possibly can during the day. The other thing is the actual angle of the roof, because you want to have that sweet spot between sunlight that's higher in the summer and sunlight that's lower in the winter. You really, this is one thing that we learned this year. It's not so much keeping the building warm that's essential, it's capturing enough sunlight, that light, because so having it so that it's going to capture the most, your roof angled and your glazing angled in such a way that it's going to capture as much light as possible during the low winter sun is essential if you're going to want to grow 4 seasons. So with thermal mass, what we want to do is we want to absorb the sun's energy. Air isn't great at doing that, okay? Air temperature fluctuates very quickly, but if you heat water, water holds the sun's energy. So, well, water holds heat a lot longer than air would. So therefore, water is a really good thing for thermal mass. And a lot of people, when they're building 4-season greenhouses, they set up water tanks to get that heat during the day, and it slowly releases at night. We currently just have one IBC, did I get it right? IBC tote up there. It's 1,000 liters, and that's what we're watering from, and I'm going to talk about that later. But that's actually helping to build the thermal mass. Also, this north wall we have built, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we go into the geothermal elements. We have built, the base structure of this is basically 2 reefers stacked on top of each other. Okay? One is subterranean mostly, and one is stacked on top of it. Yeah, and there's a slight, I think you can probably see that basically the ledge, that's the top of one of our reefers. That's a refrigerator unit C-can. It's 54 feet wide. Okay, so our greenhouse is 54 feet wide. Does that make sense? Then my brilliant partner put a sort of staggered, I think that's probably about 2.5 feet, and then stacked another one on top of it. Because it's a refrigerator unit, it's fairly well insulated, right? Which is what you want to do. You want to have something that's going to not absorb, and we're going to talk a little bit about thermal bridging later. You want something that's well insulated. So a lot of people, when they're building a passive solar design, they'll actually cut a hill in half. And that's awesome. That's a really good idea if you have the ability to do that. Cut a hill in half and put a greenhouse up against it that's south facing. You're going to be golden probably for your thermal mass, because that soil, the soil is another excellent way, an excellent thermal mass holder. So you see these raised beds, a lot of people look in here and they go, holy crap, that is a lot of soil. You guys have wasted soil. No, not at all, because these soil beds are part of the thermal mass of this building. We want to build that mass. We want to build stuff that's going to absorb energy. So we have good insulation on the back. We have water in here. We have soil in here. Another thing that maybe you may not have heard of before is PCM, phase change material. We haven't incorporated that into here yet. We likely will in the central column. You see that big black, this is it's mirror image, so it's a little bit hard. That big black column you see up, we're trying to see if we can put phase change material in there to help build that thermal mass. So when you think about phase change material, when I'm working with kids, I say to them, you remember that stuff that you crack and you put in your mitts and then it gets warm? That's basically phase change material. And so we are trying to find a way that we can implement some of that in this back wall here. Anything you can do that's going to absorb the heat during the day is going to be your helper. A lot of people will create a concrete wall. Concrete is good. It's a good way of building up. It absorbs heat during the day. Stone. I've seen people just make big, beautiful stone walls. That's an excellent way to build up your, if anybody has ever accidentally touched a fireplace after a fire and it's hot, brick. That's another way. Some people do brick walls up the back. Okay, so you just got to sort of start thinking about, if you want to build a passive solar greenhouse, having that north wall being built out of something that has a very, very high quotient for thermal mass. It was driving me crazy. There must be a scientific term for that. What is, like an R factor, or what is it? But you're looking for things that hold heat. Water, stone, concrete, soil. These are all things you want to build up, those things that are going to soak in the sun, literally, to release it later. And phase change material. And as we play with this, we'll release more information about it, because we are just tweaking with a lot of things right now. But that is something that's super important. So that's a major aspect of this build. The second major aspect, oh, is there a question? Oh, sorry. Hi, Jen. Would a barrel of compost work? Oh, that is an excellent comment, Jen. Yes, we actually, you can't see it. It's just off camera here. We built a compost pile. Yeah, we built a compost pile just a couple weeks ago. And yes, compost, not only is it soil basically, so there's this thermal mass there, but it actually generates heat. We have one thing I will say, if you are going to use a compost pile, minimum size in order to create any amount of heat would be a meter cubed. So the larger you can go, the better, because basically you need to build up the thermal mass of the compost pile so that it can start generating enough heat, because the biodiversity starts to really bloom and your pH factors start to really jazzing it up. And so, but it won't do that if it's less than a meter cube. Okay, so if you are thinking of putting a compost pile in your greenhouse, we're loving it. I love it because I can just poop, poop, poop as I'm working away here. I don't have to take it in and out. And it is also, you're absolutely right, Jan, it is generating heat. That's an excellent idea. Another thing some people do is they actually keep animals in cages, and the manure will generate heat. I've seen people who will have like stacked cages along the north wall where they've got rabbits or quail or something small, even chickens, that are generating manure, generating compost. It might seem like it's not like that, it's not enough to do something, but it really is. And if you can keep a sealed unit during the winter where there's heat being generated and being retained, that's going to help. Okay, excellent comment, Janet. Janet, I appreciate you bringing it up. So then the next other major factor for a 4-season greenhouse or house build is making use of geothermal energy. So we are standing on here almost like a swimming pool. Basically, it's approximately 8 feet deep. You can go deeper. Some people go deeper. We chose to go at 8 feet here, and we're finding it's fine. And there's 4,000 feet, more than 4,000, actually it's more like 4,500 feet of tubing stacked here. I think it's 4 layers, 4 layers of tubing back and forth, back and forth. And as we go on, we've tweaked the systems. We will be releasing some photos of that, of how we stack that. And that is basically our climate battery, okay? It's a geothermal climate battery. And what it's doing is it's running the air. We have fans. We turned it off so you could hear me speak tonight. But we're basically pumping the air through this 4,500, that's what that stack is for there, through this 4,500 feet of tubing, and it's circulating through the greenhouse. And a lot of folks are like, well, what difference does it make? Let me just put it this way. We are constantly, those of you who went to high school with me or know me at all know I'm a complete nerd and I love to collect data. So we are constantly monitoring, like it's kind of silly. We wake up in the morning, what's a geothermal today? What's checking the temperatures. And I can honestly say that in the 10 months, we started growing here in May of last year. In the 10 months that we've been growing here, that geothermal climate battery air at 8 feet below has only fluctuated from, I think we got to 8 degrees Celsius is the coldest it's been, and 16 degrees Celsius, and it's honestly been 15.5, is the warmest it's been. An 8-degree fluctuation in temperature. And that's at the same time that we're talking about from May to now, where we have gone as high as 30 degrees and as low as minus 25 degrees. So that's a 55 degree, is that right? 55 degree fluctuation temperature for the outer air. The geothermal fluctuation has been 8 degrees. Why wouldn't you make use of that? That's incredible, right? Like the earth is keeping it pretty consistent. All right, Mother Nature knows what she's doing. So by making the use of this air, it's been great during the winter, but you know when I've loved it the most is in the summer, because I've been working in the greenhouse industry for a long time. I've built several greenhouses, worked in the industry, and the number one issue when it comes to maintaining greenhouses in the summer, even if you're just doing a seasonal greenhouse, is ventilation. Like people build these huge structures and they don't have enough ventilation, and it hits there's greenhouses, people's greenhouses, they're away for one day and it spikes to 50 degrees and kills all their plants. My plants loved us because when it was a 30-degree day in here, imagine this is a big space, 30 degrees, the geothermal air was pumping up at 15.5 degrees. So it's basically air conditioning in here. On top of that, we also, this is really important, like honestly, if you take nothing from this, there's 2 key things I want you to take from this. Thermal mass, ventilation. These are 2 things you should never stop thinking about. We have on either side of this greenhouse here, you can probably see over there, that's a rolly garage door, okay? And we open those up in the summer and there's a breeze through. We're oriented, as I said, north, south. The doors are oriented east and west, and we get this nice, between that nice cool breeze going through there and the geothermal air pumping in here, it was glorious in here. Like, I know that often when you go to, like I've worked in greenhouses and we're like, oh, come on in, and like, I'm not going in there, it's hot. It was much more comfortable in here in the summer when it was stinking hot outside. It was glorious in here. And in the winter, when the sun is out, I actually have to keep shorts and t-shirts in here because it could be -20 outside and it is 25 degrees in here because the sun is capturing it. All right, so those are two things you want to consider. I know there's a lot of folks who build greenhouses that they just want to do passive and they just want to do geothermal, but honestly, having this merging of these two systems, why wouldn't you make the most use of every little trick you have in the book? When you live in Canada, in the Rocky Mountains, and you want to grow food year round, this is incredible, this space here. Another thing you might notice is the ceiling. This was a source of a lot of anxiety for me because I have been living in the Springbank region just outside of Calgary for like almost 2 decades now, and in Calgary, where if you live in that region, you know about hail. So I have always been a huge advocate for double panel polycarbonate. But if you can imagine building a roof out of that here, because hail, it bounces off of that, and if you install it properly. But this roof is 54 feet by 26 or 27 feet. It would have cost $12,000 to install that in here. I'm not going to spend $12,000. So, and my partner wasn't going to spend $12,000. So he said, we're going to put a balloon. And I thought he was crazy. Like, honestly, the amount of arguing that went on about this. He was right. It's on film. You might want to record that. I actually said he was right. Having this balloon is amazing. Not just for the R factor that the air being trapped in there, but also where we were delighted about was with snow load. Because I can't tell you how many times I have had to try to get ice and snow off of a polycarbonate roof on a greenhouse because basically every strut, every little structure holds that the ice and snow load on here. But because this is a taut, airtight balloon, it's actually, heavy snow is better than light snow because the heavy snow just slides right off. Whereas light snow, we sometimes do have to blow it off. Well, and when I say we, I mean him because I'm afraid of heights. He gets up there and he blows it off with a leaf blower. And we've been able to capture so that roofing material, being a taut balloon, is amazing. The snow just slides right off. We do maintain it with a 65 watt. Yep, oh, I got that right. 65 watt fan. Okay, it does have to be going constantly. So yes, as a worrying kind of person, I was thinking, what if we have a power failure? We do have a battery backup and a whole other solar thing going on there, where if we're just running that fan, that 65 watt fan, we've got 48 hours without power that we can still keep that balloon taut. If we're also running the geothermal fans at the same time, that's circulating the air through here, which we would, like, honestly, on a -25 day, we'd have to do that. We have 12 hours of battery backup. All right, so, okay. Oh, Jennifer, we have we have to let the men be right sometimes. Only some men, Jennifer. But yes, sometimes we do have to allow that to happen. Yep. And yeah, he is allowed to be right sometimes. So, and he's been definitely right about this. This structure is incredible to me. I get to grow here year round. That being said, there are some learnings we've made. Okay. And that's why we haven't released more information, because we want to make sure that we get everything just right before we start saying, here, this is exactly how this works. Because why would we want anybody else to go through some of the angst and anxiety that we've gone through? We want to make sure that we've tweaked it just right. I get asked all the time, what about supplemental? So yes, we do have a wood stove up there. As I said, we're in the middle of a forest, so we do have access to a lot of wood on the property, and we do use it. But there was a little sweet spot there. One of the things that I've been most frustrated with during the winter only has been humidity. And I shouldn't be surprised. I know that those of you who have greenhouses are like, oh yeah, humidity. Of course, in the summer when we have all these wonderful doors open and we have all the fans going in here, yeah, there's no problem with humidity whatsoever. It's perfect. But in the winter, I'm finding that we did have issues with some places retaining a lot of humidity, getting mold growths and fungus that I didn't like, not the good fungus, bad fungus, that kind of thing. So that was an issue. And I wasn't able to save as many seeds as I normally would because I hung them up and it just was too damp in here. But we found that when we started supplementing the heat with the wood stove, it did actually dry out the air quite a bit. So I know that if you have a property like this where you're sort of off grid or away from and you've got your own wood, just burning even to take care of some of the humidity is a great thing. It did help to dry up in here. Whenever we do the stove, it's like, oh yeah, it's great. It's much less humid in here, much less water coming down. We also put a third layer on here for the winter. We've been debating when to take it down because it is diffusing the light a little bit. Things are growing great in here. We've got tomatoes coming up. We've got basil coming up. We honestly, everything I've been planting has been coming up. It's been warm enough. But I know that once we take this third layer down in the middle, we're going to get more, and we also have it along the front casing here. This is glass that we have here with this balloon on top, and then the side here is glass. Once we take this down, we're going to be able to allow for more ventilation. And honestly, it's like, do you think we should do it now? And this is one of the things we'll be able to share. One of the learnings we'll be able to share is when is a good time to remove that third layer. We have found we're heating less space with this third layer. But in the summer, when we remove it, we'll be able to do hanging baskets and stuff growing more vertically and getting way more growth in here. So that is one of the design things that we've decided that we like doing, is adding a third layer during the winter. But that does mean that we're not going to be able to grow as many of the light-loving, heat-loving things, which brings up another factor. When this space was designed, it was designed based on the normal conditions in the winter here in Golden. And normally here in Golden, we have cold winters with a lot of sun. Well, guess what we had this winter? We had super mild temperatures and it was cloudy. Like honestly, for the months of November, December, and January, we barely saw the sun. That changed our strategy, right? You have to be able to roll with the punches. And we did, I'm not thinking we're going to have some of the same issues next year, because hopefully we'll have those cold, sunny days. The cold wasn't an issue. We were always able to keep it warm enough in here without a lot of intervention. Having that stove running, having the fans going, it was the light. We just didn't have the light that we're normally used to having here during the winter. So that was one of the issues. If we had set up supplemental lighting, we could have planted more. And if I hadn't been so afraid of taking down plants that were still living but not producing as much, I've never been able to grow year round. Like even in my hometown of Ladner, which is a wonderful little town and has got amazing growing conditions there. You know, we honestly would have roses at Christmas time. Like roses would still be blooming at Christmas time, but you couldn't plant things at Christmas time, right? I just can't bring myself to take down a plant that still looks like it's living. So at the end of September, end of October, I still had all of these hoops that you see up here were covered in squash plants and tomato plants that were still green, but when I really think about it, they weren't producing much anymore. I should have pulled them down. It hurts. You feel like a plant murderer taking down a plant that isn't fully dead. But if it's not producing in a 4-season greenhouse, You gotta time it right so that you've got enough light to let the next generation, because technically we should be able to get 3 cycles of plants through here. We really weren't able to do that to the full capacity because I was such a wuss and I would not take down living plants. And I'm not the only one. Somebody would like get mad. Well, the plant looks beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, but we gotta make room, right? So what we're doing this year, last year we started in May because it wasn't ready for planting until May. This year we start, like this bed right here, this is a squash bed. So last week I planted in here corn and beans and radish. Once those are up, and I noticed today the radishes are up and I should be seeing my corn and beans soon, those squash seeds are going in the soil. Okay, so my goal is to have this bed planted up within the next week, which means that I will have 3.5 months before I have to tear it down and plant another bed in there in July. Okay, which will give me enough time. My goal is to have 3 cycles, 2 short heat-loving cycles and 1 longer cycle of cold-loving crops so that we can grow year-round in here. Because it's not just about germination. You've got to have those plants get to the point where they're actually flourishing before the light starts to diminish. So my goal is to have, if I'm talking about this bed right here, for instance, because we do also implement crop rotation cycles in here just in order to keep our soil nice and healthy. And so this was a tomato bed. Now it's a squash bed. Then it's going to turn into a brassica bed. So my goal here is to have this squash bed up, running, producing fruit. I'm going to pull it down by July 1st at the latest. I don't care what's going on, so that I can get a brassica bed going in there. What's in the brassica bed next to it will then become a tomato bed. Like there's this whole cycle that we're going through. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to make use of that thermal mass. This isn't a complete build yet. My brilliant partner, who refuses to be on camera, has designed another system where we will have a catwalk that's going to jut out from this back wall, tall enough for my 6-foot son to walk underneath and his 6-foot son to walk underneath. And we will also have plants growing up on that catwalk, up that back wall, heat-loving plants. Because remember how we talked about the thermal mass and how that back wall is retaining heat? If we're growing our cukes and our peppers and our tomatoes up that back wall, that's going to help them. We're also hoping there's another floor up there at the top of the second sea can that will have stuff growing from the catwalk up the back wall and stuff from the top floor growing down the back wall. So vertical growth. Because if you're going to spend the money to build something like this, you have to make use of every square inch. Why wouldn't you, right? Like it's crazy. We're going to make sure that we're making every square inch of this usable. But that being said, one of the other things that I learned is if you're looking at growing permanent stuff like trees. So in here right now, we have fig trees, pomegranates, we got grapes, and we're about to install some citrus and some avocado. So these are permanent things that we want to grow over and over and over again. We're not putting them in these 6 beds because these 6 beds are going to go through a crop rotation cycle. And I was able to monitor by keeping those plants in pots and not putting them in the ground that first 10 months. We are able to see, we're delighted because the figs made it. Everything made it. The only thing that didn't make it was a hibiscus. But next year, we will make sure that hibiscus makes it. Like, it's just a matter of tweaking stuff. We're able to see, oh, you know what? The figs like it here. Oh, pomegranates like it here. We're able to, don't put those permanent, if you're going to build a structure to grow year-round fruit, it's worthwhile keeping them in the big pots for that first year so that you can actually see what's going to thrive where. Does that make sense? So I am so glad we didn't put things where I originally thought they were going to be. And now we're now what we're doing is we have these 6 beds are our crop rotation beds, whereas this bed up along the front and along the sides, that's where we're putting perennials and where we're putting plants that are good and herbs and things that, and also another thing that we're doing in here is where I'm putting stuff that I want to go to seed, like for instance carrots. Carrots generally are a biannual. They take more than 1 season to produce seed. Here we're finding they're producing seed. Like I got some carrots I planted last May and they're flowering now. So they're producing within a year because it's going through a whole cycle. But from now on, if I want something to grow to seed, it's growing in this bed because I'm not going to disturb that bed. I'm not going to do a crop rotation cycle in it. And that is also where, because it's up against the window here, where the stuff that I want to survive and thrive throughout a long Canadian winter is going to be up along this bed here where it's going to get the most sunlight during the winter as well. All right, I hope that makes sense. So we've discussed thermal mass, passive solar design. We've discussed geothermal design. Once again, the geothermal design is just making use of the consistent temperatures below ground, cycling it up above ground and storing it below. Basically, it's called a climate battery, where you are storing the energy for when you're going to need it. And then one thing that we actually, I used to work for Cultivate Cochrane and Society in Cochrane, obviously, where there are also extremely erratic growing conditions. And I worked with the solar roller, where we demonstrated a lot of passive solar design elements. And one of the things we did there, because we couldn't, it was a portable greenhouse that moved back and forth to different schools and different public events. And it was wonderful. If you have an opportunity to see the solar roller, do it. Okay? I basically lived in that structure for 2 years and it was awesome. So do it. But one of the things we did in there is in order to demonstrate geothermal energy and that thermal mass is we put pipes. We did the same concept with below ground with pipes running through the soil. We put them in the solar roller. We put them in the raised beds themselves. I'm like, why wouldn't we do that? And so basically, we're not only are we piping the geothermal air into the air of the greenhouse, we're actually piping it through each of these beds, which has been wonderful because we've been able to maintain the beds themselves with the air running through it. They've never frozen. Even when it's just been amazing seeing how fusing these two ideas of using your passive solar thermal mass design mixed with the geothermal. It's incredible. Oh yes, the beds never got below 7 degrees. So if you're a gardener, and that's with it being a Canadian Rocky Mountain winter, the soil itself never got below 7 degrees. And that's with us, not even, this is our first season. We're just learning, right? We're just tweaking the system. So those beautiful greens that you see there, they flourish throughout the winter. Okay, so mixing these two things together is something that I really, really advise. Another thing we were able to do is I have chickens and ducks, and we have a portable coop that we've put just over here. I'm afraid you can't see it. So we're able to actually, we're able to use the thermal mass of this greenhouse to help maintain the chicken coop. In a Canadian Rocky winter, it can get really cold. Those chickens have never been happier. Okay, they love it in there. When I used to have them in my Alberta homestead, they would basically storm the gates to get outside every day because they hated it in their coop. But now they're like, they have a little spa. They're happy as clams and lazy. They don't even want to go outside anymore. They love their little coop, which is basically attached with tubing to this greenhouse. So that's another thing to consider. If you do have animals, building a thermal mass and somehow attaching it to your greenhouse, it's it's beneficial for both. Okay, now, so we talked about the learnings, taking things down. Another thing that we've done is water. That's another major consideration whenever you have a greenhouse. So because this is a high structure, we actually have filled, and what we do is it probably lasts, well, depending on the season, right? Because plants do have different watering needs during different seasons of the year. During the summer, we probably fill it from the water that's here on the property. We probably fill it every 3 to 4 days. In the winter, it's more like 2 weeks, right? You don't need to water as much during the winter. But because we have that IPC, I keep getting this wrong, up there, we can gravity feed. I don't, like basically I've got a hose and I just put a little nozzle in it, and because it's up high, the pressure is great, and I'm able to water everything in here, and I can see how it's going. We also feed the chickens from that water, and so they never have frozen water. We can easily just shift it through there. Okay? Are there any questions about that stuff? Let me just double check here. There was things I wanted. There's so much to talk about here. I just want to make sure that I got it. We talked about. Now, another thing, and this might seem silly, but we talk about soil being thermal mass. The healthier your soil is, okay, the more you maintain the biodiversity of that soil, the more you're going to build the thermal mass of that soil, because there's living things in it, and living things generate heat. Okay, it's just the way things work. So the more you've got the worms going in, that keep that soil healthy, and that will also help to build a thermal mass. If you're trying to, yes, some people use sand as thermal mass, but soil, living soil with moisture in it, is going to maintain that thermal mass better. Now, another thing we did, people ask all the time, oh my gosh, it's so huge, you must have spent a fortune. Yes, it wasn't cheap, but one thing that we have implemented a lot in here is we upcycled. There is so much reuse of stuff that would normally be thrown away or recycled in the structure of this building. When I first came to this property, there were piles and piles and piles of stuff out there, and it was like, what is going on? And it was things that have been held on to in order with the design concept in mind. So just at a first glance, if you want to think about things that have been upcycled in here, so that we didn't expend a lot of money, and also we're finding are better things to use. Highway guardrails. Like, these things are incredible as our raised beds. They nest into each other, so the ones that are down here are 2 nested into each other, and the ones that are up here that are higher are 3 nested into each other. They will never rot, okay? The other thing that's wonderful is they have holes in them, which we're then able to put our vertical structure for our vertical growth growing into. So that's one of the major things that we did, is we reuse things that we're finding around the sea cans. These are retired reefers, okay? So, but they form the base structure for this building. And we're not only going to be just like right now, they're just storage, but as we move on, one of these will be for processing. We'll probably do aquaponics and another one. So yes, they're wonderful for creating that base structure, but they also serve a function, and they're being reused. These would end up in a junkyard, but now look what they are. They're this amazing building, okay? So reusing stuff. I can't show you right now, but the roof is spectacular because it's basically the joists come from a flat roof building, and they're like that red, beautiful metal. And I'm going to be able to like, even from just the ceiling itself, once we have a pulley system set up, we will be able to grow like hundreds of baskets in here, and also set up an automatic drip irrigation system that runs down these joists that were purchased from scrap metal, right? You don't have to go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff. One of the things that I find most endearing about this building is hot tub covers, okay? So these are things that are normally tossed away and will never, never degrade, right? So that's normally a bad thing. It's a good thing though, if you're thinking of building something that you want to actually stay. What we've done is all of our insulation underground, is it 3 layers or 2 layers? 4 layers of hot tub covers are the wall underground here. Oh, I see another one. Have ever thought of putting a ledge on the raised beds for aging bodies? You bet. Yes, 100%, Jennifer. That is in the design, but that's we actually do want to put lovely little platforms to sit on, but we haven't, and it will happen. It is more comfortable right now. Like if I sit down here, you can see it does have a nice rounded edge, so it's not too bad to sit on, but actually it's not so much for the aging bodies that we want to put. We will eventually, once we get through all the tweaking, we will put a nice ledge on it, but it's more for the lettuce than for me, because these are wonderful. But remember, we talked about thermal mass. Metal is one of those things that retains thermal mass. So in the hot summer, they warm up quite a bit, which is great. But not, I've always grown lettuce around the border of all my beds. And sometimes in the middle of the summer, the lettuce that touches these edges wilts. It just gets too warm. But if we put a wood barrier there, then it'll be better. So yes, very good point. I do, I'm a Nazi, well, I'm a dictator, I should say, about not stepping on the soil. So one of the wonderful things about these hard metal things is we can lay platforms. If, for instance, somebody has to do some work on the roof, we can put a platform down. We can even put scaffolding up on it so that work can be done and we're not compressing the soil, right? That's really important, that we don't go right into the soil. We don't step on it. We don't sit on it directly. So yes, we have considered it. It's one of those things. But you do bring up a good point, Jennifer, because along the wall here, we used some of the guardrails and they went down to the background. And what we discovered is we were inadvertently, because they're not sealed on top, when we started running the fire, when it was the coldest days of winter, we were drawing, because it created a negative pressure. Fire consumes air, you're creating negative pressure, and we were drawing cold air. While we were running the stove, we actually, for the first couple of days, it got colder in here, because where the guardrails are up and it go all the way down to the ground, below ground, it was drawing the cold air from the spring below ground, not just the geothermal ground, but where the cold water was. And we're like, why is it getting colder? So that's one of the things that takes a little bit of tweaking, and that's the thermal bridging. Whenever you start creating negative pressure in your greenhouse, because either you maybe have a fire going is a good example of how to create some negative pressure. All of a sudden you start realizing, holy crap, there's a lot of cold air being sucked in. You can actually feel like the cold air coming in once you start lighting fires. And that's a really, like, there's a lot of times that we're running around like, you're running around, where's that cold air coming from? So you got to think about your thermal bridging. So for instance, these reefers, they're made out of metal. And on the outer wall, that metal is minus 25. Sorry, made out of aluminum, which is a metal, but whatever. Aluminum is, when it's minus 30 outside, that aluminum gets cold really fast. And then if it's got an aluminum bar, which it does at the bottom, it's coming in, it's bringing that 35. It's the structure itself is bringing that cold in. It's thermal bridging. So we're constantly like trying to find places where we can insulate that needs it, okay? Because you have to think about that with your design. You wouldn't have to worry about that if you, say, built this in the back of a hill, right? Because you've got it already underground. The thermal mass of the soil is going to keep it. But if you have a metal structure and the metal feeds inside and it's also exposed outside, that thermal bridging is going to happen. Okay, so you may have to do extra. We had a very unhappy guy lying on his back, putting insulation up, getting drip. Yeah, it's there is a lot of tweaking that does need to happen. It's all a wonderful design concept, and we're really happy. And I can't tell you, I'm beyond pleased being able to put my hands in the dirt on a daily basis in the middle of winter and smell that fresh air. I'm always joking that I'm just going to put a bed on the top floor so I can wake up every day and smell my plants and see all of my little hoverflies. We were able to maintain, it's a running joke around here. Yes, it's great that we can grow food year round, but what I almost am more excited about is, oh my gosh, like if I were to lift a piece of mulch from here right now, you would see red wigglers right at the surface of this. There is mycelium going through all of this all the time. There are hoverflies that are living in here year round. Like once the spring came, they like, well, I shouldn't even say spring. Once it got, 10 above 10 degrees consistently in here, the hoverflies are in here. We got ladybugs that lived year round in here, didn't bother to go dormant. So it's that having that biodiversity of not just the plant life, but the animal life in here, all our beneficial buggies, has been incredible. So I figure if they can live here year round, why can't I? I really do think I should just have a cot up there. So that's another thing that we've learned, is that maintaining that soil biodiversity has been possible in a space like this. All right, so we're getting close to wrap up time. So if there's anybody has any questions about any of the other stuff, I know I've been rambling on about the greenhouse, but I know that some of you are also in the middle of getting your seeds started and stuff. So if there's any questions about that right now, I'm just going to say, I'm letting you know now would be a good time to ask. You won't be interrupting me. And I will continue to talk about a couple of the other design features, but I think I've covered most of the essential stuff. We will be sharing more as we go. As I said, we're constantly tweaking, we're constantly playing, we're constantly coming up with new design stuff to ensure that we've got it. Like I said, this has only been planted for 10 months. And I never thought it was going to do, of course, you want everything to do really, really well. But when I see the amount of food that we're already getting out of here for this time of the year, it's pretty incredible. And I know that next year, with the learnings that we've had from last year, we won't have any gaps in food production. And we always had something growing in here. Like as through this, I grow calendula as a companion plant all the time. Well, guess what? It's a perennial when in the right conditions. I had no idea. But I've got we've literally had flowers blooming in here year round. The calendula has maintained year round. And a lot of my nasturtiums, I've had to cut them back a few times. They're continuing to produce. Another thing in here, I'm looking forward to coming back again real quick, is the scarlet runners. The catnip, it's just never, like I'm constantly, my cats are very pleased that we built this greenhouse, because I don't know if you can see that here, but this has been cut back like 3 or 4 times, and it's still producing like crazy. We're discovering things about plants that we didn't know, because in harsh conditions, how do we know if our soil is alive or dead? That is an excellent question, Jennifer. Number one way that I know is I smell it. Okay, if it smells like, you can smell sort of that mushroomy smell, that's a good sign. Like if you've got that, because that's mycelium you're probably smelling. If you see worms in it, that's a good sign. If it's, soil will die if it gets too hot or too dry. Okay, so a lot of people make an error in greenhouse growing is that they just seal their greenhouses up and they don't bother to water the soil. Like even if you have a greenhouse that you're not growing year round, but you've developed good soil over the summer, I throw snow into those periodically throughout the year just to keep the soil beds alive. because if something dries out too much, you're going to have to start from scratch again. So once the soil is warmed up enough, pick it up and smell it. Honestly, that is one of the best ways to know, because if you smell that kind of that smell of mushrooms, the mycelium, if you see little critters in it, that's a really good sign. I know a lot of people, we've got lots of fungus gnats in here right now. I don't care. Like, I honestly don't care, because for me, that's a good sign that there is life being generated in my soil. And once we get the ventilation going over here again, once the heat goes up, it's going to be back. Oh, got another one. Jan, seeded Ferrari beans, green beans last year, 2 different brands, and neither grew, but green beans right next to it grew. Any ideas why? You know what? That happened to me just recently. I grew 5 different kinds of basil. I've got them started over there. And my lettuce leaf basil, nothing's coming up. Like, it happens. Like, it's sometimes it could be a faulty seed pack. Sometimes it's just the conditions. And that's one of the reasons I companion plant, because no matter what I do, and I love growing, I focus so much of my energy in learning about growing, I will have a crop fail every year. Don't think you're an idiot if you don't, because if you're an idiot, I'm an idiot, because I've had lots and lots and lots of crops fail. And it's one of the reasons why I companion plant. So I'm not focusing all my energies in one space to one thing. So for instance, if my Ferrari green beans didn't come up, I'd be okay, because I'm still going to have corn, and I'm still going to have squash growing there, and radishes as well, all in the same space. So a lot of people believe that for beans and peas you have to use inoculant. I've never had to do that, because I'm focused on my soil biodiversity. So there is a slight chance, Jan, that maybe your soil didn't have a lot of life in it, and that didn't help the seed coats to break. Like, there's a lot of things going on with soil. If we keep our soil alive, if we maintain the biodiversity of our soil, our seeds are going to grow better. And you're going to have to focus a lot less on doing all that stratification that you need to do to get some of your seeds to grow. I hope that's helpful. If not, you can reach me, Jan, and we can talk about it more. Okay, I have always put 2 feet of snow in my greenhouse. Yes, that's a very good thing to do. Keeping the greenhouse soil, I think I would say, apart from lack of ventilation, lack of greenhouse maintenance in the winter. Like, especially if you're growing in raised beds and not in pots. And honestly, in a greenhouse, I do not know why people grow in pots in greenhouse, because honestly, it can, in most greenhouses, not in here, because we got the geothermal stuff going through, those erratic temperature changes can really be detrimental to a pot growing thing. But keeping that soil, that deep watering with keeping snow on is a great idea. Okay, last year it happened to me too. I planted 5 different beans out of that, only 2 types grew. And one of them, I thought, oh, you didn't have a great bean harvest. So one of the things that I discovered, I think you're in Alberta, right? Sajal, I hope I'm saying your name right. I think you're in Alberta. Can I recommend to you a specific bean type? Because as I said, I grew up on the West Coast, where if you accidentally drop a bean in the soil, it's going to grow well. And I struggled so much when I moved to Alberta with finding a bean that would grow well, until I discovered the purple peacock pole bean. Try it, Fort McMurray. Yes. Okay. So you have similar conditions, those erratic conditions, and beans don't like that. Beans like warm soil. Most beans do. So I would suggest, if I were you, just get a hold of, if you can, some purple, going to try saying that again, purple peacock pole beans. They're like the super bean, okay? They don't care if you got sudden cold. Like, they're much more, I found them much more resilient to harsh conditions and erratic temperature changes than most of the other beans out there. So I know West Coast has them, and so do a lot of other providers. So yes, give it a try. Purple peacock pole beans. All right. I grow them in here. they're my favorite bean now, because they're beautiful, they're productive, they taste wonderful. Okay, I hope you will. Let me know how it goes, okay? And I think you're in the winter sowing Facebook group as well, right? If let those folks know. That's another thing. We do have a Facebook group if called Winter Sowing and Planting Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. But it's not just for prairie provinces. I want this to be a welcoming spot where people who have to grow in harsh conditions can come together and share ideas. And so, and it's not just about winter sowing. It's all about all these different strategies we can do to work together here. So I think that we're just wrapping up here. Don't worry if you do have some more questions that do come up. This will be available also as a separate, like it's live now, but it does continue. You can keep sending me questions on it. I will keep responding. And I hope that this was helpful for you. I hope you'll consider implementing some passive solar and geothermal design into a greenhouse space. You know that you can also reach out to me just on my YouTube channel. I'm very excited. We're inching up. We're really close to the 5,000 followers. It's pretty exciting. Maybe next time you guys see me next week, I'll be able to announce that. And I hope that you will continue to ask me those questions. And as always, I hope you'll take this chance to grow together today. Thanks for joining in, guys.